Good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. It's a great crowd. I'm Mike Pieciak. I'm the state treasurer here in Vermont. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We have a lot to talk about in terms of impact and in terms of dollars and cents and ways that we're thinking about that at the treasurer's office, the way our legislators are thinking about that in Montpelier. But I think it's just important to first acknowledge, the emotion of the moment that we're living in. I mentioned I grew up here in Brattleboro. I've been hearing from my family and friends about how people are feeling fear and anger and anxiety. And I went to this middle school, so that anxiety piece is sort of bubbling up this morning. But in seriousness, those are powerful emotions: fear, anger, and anxiety. I wonder how many people in this room have felt more fear, anger, and anxiety in the last 2 months than they have than they have most of their lives, or at least on average. So you think about those emotions: fear, anger, you think about anxiety and how they can keep us up at night, how they can cloud our judgment, how they can make us our heart beat. They can have a physical reaction. But I think more importantly than those reactions is sometimes they make us into a state of paralysis. They make us stop taking action. When you think about fear and the uncertainty that comes from fear, sometimes people want to retreat and say, I'll wait for things to get a little bit more certain before taking action. You think about anger and looking at the system and how we perceive it to be broken and maybe unfixable, and you think, I'm going to check this one out. Or you think about anxiety and the sort of whispering of, well, what can you do? Or you can't, you're not up to the task. Those emotions can really make us stand back in a moment when we all need to really stand up, both for each other and for our communities. And that word community, I think, is the key. I think community is the antidote to those emotions that I mentioned. Community is the antidote to isolation, to fear, to loneliness, to anxiety. When we get together in community like this, we realize, as by a show of hands, we all have the same fears. These are fears and emotions we're experiencing together. When we come together and say, we are angry, but let's put that anger to a productive purpose rather than feeling like the world is beyond repair. When we think about anxiety, when we get together, those emotions melt away and we're ready to act. Community, like we're doing today and this morning, community itself can turn haplessness into action. It can turn despair into hope. And beyond the things that we're going to be talking about this morning, that act of us coming together as a community and talking about our values and talking about Vermont values and what we're worried about and what we're concerned about, and not being afraid to call it out and name it, is critical and important in itself. The other thing I think about, it's been 5 years basically this week since the pandemic hit. And when you think about those emotions I mentioned, those were running pretty rampant at that time as well. But again, during the pandemic, we largely had to face that moment of crisis in isolation. We were forced to be apart from each other. This moment in time, this particular challenge that we're facing, it's going to be important for us to do it together in community, find ways to build relationships within our neighborhoods, on our streets, ways to take action, big and small, and most importantly, that we do it together. So again, thank you all for being here this morning and taking this action together today. So I want to first do some acknowledgments and some thank yous. I want to thank John Potter, who's here, who's going to be moderating the discussion in a minute. I want to thank the Brattleboro Select Board members who are here. I know I saw a couple of them. I see Liz in the back. Thank you, Liz, for being here. I want to thank the Brattleboro Area Middle School for hosting us today as well. I want to thank Sheriff Mark Anderson for being here also. Appreciate that, Mark. And then want to thank our legislators who are here. We'll be hearing from some of our legislators after we have a chance to hear from you all. But beyond the legislators who are here and will introduce themselves, maybe we can have the legislators who won't be addressing us stand and briefly introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start here with Ian on the end.
Okay. Hi everybody, I'm Ian Goodnow. I'm the rep for Wyndham District 9 here in Brattleboro. Morning. My name is Zahn Eastis, and I'm the representative for Wyndham 1, which is Guilford and Vernon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Harris Duncan, representing Wyndham 6, Wilmington, Whitingham, and Halifax.
Molly Burke, representing Wyndham 8, which includes this high school complex.
And I think we had Mike Murwicki here.
He's over here.
Oh. So we'll hear from him later. So I thought I just would say a minute about sort of what I'm focused on and thinking about when we're talking about the changing landscape at the federal level. And there's a lot to be worried about and to be focused on, quite frankly. But in my role as state treasurer, we're focused on the economy, how those actions impact our revenues in the state, how they impact our budget, and then how they impact all of you at your kitchen tables as well. And I thought there'd be four numbers about the Vermont economy that I could mention that sort of exemplify why I'm concerned about the changes that are happening at the federal level. The first number is 36%, the second number is 76%, the third number is 1 in 5, and the last one is about, I gotta actually check my notes. The last one is about FEMA reimbursement, being 5th in the nation in terms of our dependency on FEMA reimbursement. But thinking about that first one, 36% of our state budget is dependent on the federal government. 36% of our budget is made up of federal funds that come from Washington, D.C. that fund important programs like work done at the Department of Education and work done at the Department of Health. And most importantly, in terms of the sheer size and the sheer scope, critical healthcare programs that we operate in Medicaid arena. So when the federal government is talking about freezing funds, or the federal government is talking about cutting funds, that is a big impact to the state of Vermont. It's a big impact to our budget, but more importantly, it's a big impact to our communities and all of the ways that local nonprofits and government agencies are trying to support local government, local communities and individuals in those communities. So 36%. 76% is the amount of imports that we receive from Canada. Canada is our largest trading partner by far. They are our biggest exporter and biggest importer in terms of Vermont goods. The tariffs that have been talked about, have been announced, have been pulled back, they've damaged that relationship from a business standpoint. They've damaged that relationship in terms of our trade with Canada. They've damaged that in terms of tourism, which is important to our economy as well. $150 million of economic activity happens from Canadians visiting Vermont every year. But beyond that economic impact, Canada has always been an ally of the United States and has always been a friend to Vermont, particularly when you live in northern Vermont. Our communities are intertwined. It's as if, in some ways, we have more kinship with Quebec than we do with New Hampshire, So we are feeling that, not just economically, but we're feeling that in our communities across Vermont. And that uncertainty that's been created by the tariff has produced anxiety in the business community. You're seeing it in the stock market. You're seeing it in consumer sentiment. You're seeing it when the University of Michigan puts out an estimate about the GDP growth in this quarter, and it looks like we're going to see a sharp decrease. All of those things add up to the result of uncertainty, and unfortunately, they have real-world impacts. That idea of 1 in 5, what I mean by that is 1 in 5 people in Vermont work for a nonprofit. That is a big part of our economy in Vermont. 1 in 5 people work for an organization that may be at risk of having its federal funding cut in some way or altogether. There was an analysis done of how many nonprofits are at risk of if their federal grants go away, they will then become insolvent. And across the country, there were a very, very high percentage of nonprofits that fall in that category, including here in Vermont. So nonprofits do great work in our communities, but they also do great work to our economy, contributing billions of dollars to the Vermont economy. So that's something of critical concern. The last thing I wanted to mention is this idea of number 5. And Vermont, we don't think of ourselves sometimes as having these big numbers in terms of natural disasters happening to the state. You think of Florida and Louisiana, other places that had these huge hurricanes. But Vermont, we're 5th per capita in the country in terms of FEMA reimbursement, FEMA support over the last 15 years. 5 per capita, and we're number 7 in the country, not on a per capita basis, but just number 7 in terms of the number of emergency declarations that have been declared due to natural disaster over the last 15 years. So we depend heavily on the federal government to be there when a natural disaster strikes. I mention this because it's one of the areas where the federal government, we rely heavily on the federal government, and the federal government has a lot of discretion about whether or not to help us. So obviously that is an area of concern for me that rises to the top. So what do we do about this, or how do we analyze it? You know, it's why in our office we created this Federal Transition Task Force, this task force that was going to help our office think beyond our, literal office in Montpelier and bring in important community members, people that are being impacted by the terror of small business owners, people that work with immigrant refugees that are being impacted both because their funding is being impacted and because their clients are being significantly impacted. We asked folks that are in the healthcare community, folks that have really good experience with the federal government and federal funding and state government and state funding to be part of this task force to help us think through these impacts. When I was at the Department of Financial Regulation during the first Trump administration, we found that when we were proactive and we were coordinated, that we were able to get ahead of some of the worst outcomes, some of the worst impacts. And when we weren't coordinated and we weren't proactive, when things happened in this sort of fast-moving federal policy space, we were left on our back heels. So I think it's really important for us to be in that sort of proactive mindset throughout this entire period of great upheaval and transition. So what does the task force do? We've been thinking of ourselves in a couple of ways. One that is important to us is simply thinking about ourselves as a conduit for information. We've had a couple of different live in-person webinars focused on issues like what happens if you're an employer and ICE shows up at your place of employment. What are your rights and your responsibilities as an employer? 1,000 people showed up to that webinar to listen and to learn. Another couple of thousand watched the video that we placed on YouTube. Just this week, we had a webinar about doing business in uncertain times. We had a few hundred business owners show up to learn from a panel of experts about what should they be thinking about, how should they be handling this, from handling their employees to be thinking about their business, how do they get through this period of uncertainty. And then we're doing events like this where we want to hear directly from folks about what you're worried about and what you're concerned about. And we plan to take that information and summarize it and provide a report both to legislative leadership here in Vermont, to the governor's office, and to our congressional delegation as well. We're also thinking about advocacy. We've been advocating at the federal level and at the state level around some of these policies I mentioned and their impact on Vermont. And we're also thinking about our own policy ideas. For example, I mentioned the FEMA impact and how reliant we are on the federal government. So we have come up with this idea of creating a special natural disaster reserve fund for the state of Vermont that we can put money aside for in good times in the event that a natural disaster does strike our state again. And unfortunately, it's more likely a matter of when that will happen and not if it will happen. So we are trying to take a deliberate approach to all these things. We're trying to unearth as much as we can. We're trying to bring in experts across state government, outside of state government. And again, the most important thing, in my opinion, is hearing directly from folks in communities across Vermont. This is the first town hall we have done like this. We'll do another one this afternoon in South Burlington. Senator Welch will be joining us in South Burlington, as well as local legislators and local community leaders. So we'll be excited to hear from him about the week that was in Washington, D.C. But like I said, we're really mostly interested in hearing from you all this morning about your thoughts and concerns. So with that, I do want to turn it over to John Potter to sort of kick off the moderated portion of the discussion. And thank you, John, for doing this, and thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Treasurer Pieciak. I'm the town manager in Brattleboro, and the Treasurer's office asked me to help facilitate this conversation. It's great to see so many people here, and the agenda for this morning is designed to hear from as many of you as possible, and I'll try to help see that that happens. We have 35 minutes to discuss three things. The first is, what challenges in this federal environment are you seeing right now? What are you feeling? And so the Treasurer would like to hear from you about what you're seeing and feeling in terms of challenges. The second thing is we want to sort of pivot the conversation to opportunities. Within this this environment, what are you seeing for possible opportunities? And then thirdly, what positive ideas for action might you have that we could, work on together to try to move forward? So I'll move us through these three categories, and please know that this meeting is being recorded. And as the treasurer mentioned, their office will be summarizing what they hear from you and sharing that with the congressional delegation, with the governor's office, as well as our legislative delegation who's here today. There may be a lot of comments, so I'll let you know this is sort of how it'll go. I will hold the mic and come around, and if somebody has a comment they'd like to make, please speak into the mic. Don't be surprised or disappointed if once we kind of get the gist of what you're saying, we want to move on to make sure that we get to as many people as possible to hear from you all. Going to start with a quick poll. So a quick raise of hands. How many people are concerned with the current direction of federal action? Okay, that looks pretty unanimous. But whether or not you're concerned, how many people have thought about this situation and see opportunities? Great, we really want to hear from you. And then thirdly, I wanted to get an idea of, for those that are concerned about what's happening right now, what are some of your top concerns? So how many people are worried about tariffs? Okay. How many are seeing a major concern around federal layoffs? A bit more. Thank you. Funding freezes. Okay, what about immigration actions? All right, how many would say all of the above? Okay. All right, that's very helpful, thank you. Now, let's spend about 15 minutes or so on hearing particular concerns or challenges that people are seeing right now. And then we will then try to move on to ideas for action from there. So raise your hand and I'll come around, and I saw you first. You might want to just say your name.
Okay. Hi, my name is Laura, and I am a mathematician scientist, and I work, I'm a federal contractor, so it's been incredibly stressful. Every day brings new issues, and I work with NOAA scientists, and so seeing all of my colleagues get laid off, or suddenly we don't have resources for data. We work on climate modeling, understanding, the issues that Vermont goes through. So I don't really have a question, just, seeing all of my colleagues get laid off and incredible instability. Yesterday we got a message saying that we have a funding freeze, no procurements, we have to close all of our openings, and so I feel very passionately about the science that we do, and that it's going to be crucial for our country and getting through climate change. But if we lay off all of our scientists who we went through 6 years of a PhD earning not much money, and then we chose federal jobs, and in part for the good that we'd be able to do. We're not doing this for the money. We're doing it because we care. And it's just a really terrifying time. I don't want to have to look for another job because I really feel passionately about what I'm doing. But that's what every single scientist who works for the federal government as a contractor or directly for the government is thinking right now. And it's just really scary.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
Can I say something to Laura? Just, I think that service, greater calling than public service. So thank you. And that concern, both in terms of your job specifically, and then just more broadly the federal workforce. Like in Vermont, we've had some pretty serious flooding in the last couple of years, and NOAA and their great work has meant that we didn't have a lot of fatalities with those flooding. They were able to get ahead, warn people. We were able to warn people before that July 2023 flooding, days before, about how significant the impact was going to be, and particularly into certain communities in central Vermont. And then long term, like, we're not going to be able to figure out how to most effectively battle climate change without the exact kind of expertise that you're talking about. And then with the federal government, just more broadly in the workforce, you know, you used to think that the federal government was a stable place for employment, and that attracted people that were interested in making a difference, over the long term, because a lot of times these differences and these changes don't happen quickly, and we need people with that mindset. So I worry a great deal about that, who follows this president and what that means in terms of them putting the pieces back together. So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for your service.
Great points.
Hi, my name is Katie Wilson, and I work in the mental health space. I work for an organization that is a federal grantee. About 60% of our funding comes from that, and right now our grant has not been renewed. We work with people who've experienced serious mental health challenges, who have been able to overcome those, some of them also with substance use challenges, and they're back in the workforce as peer support specialists. This is a program that we've been working on developing in the state of Vermont for a long time, and has great potential for both being cost effective as well as very effective for how people experience their sort of mental health challenges. And this is, aside from kind of our experiences kind of federally where we nationally train people, it also trickles down to how we experience things here in Vermont, because while every other state has pretty much developed their peer specialist classification, how they get reimbursed, getting those kinds of jobs into the mental health workforce, we're just starting that here. That is partially federally funded as well. And so I feel like this is like kind of a lesson to say the national level of this kinds of education for the very mental health issues that we're started talking about here in the very beginning, that the way that that's going to show up here in Vermont is not being able to have those sorts of developments within our own state, while we know that they are very effective nationally.
Great, thank you. What, who else is seeing challenges over here?
Hi, I'm Julie from Guilford. A few challenges. One of my daughters is graduating from college this year, and her friends are applying to graduate school in the sciences, and they're all getting rejection letters, not because they are not qualified, but because there isn't the funding. So my concern is we're losing scientists right now who are in the federal workforce, and we're losing our future scientists, and that's a great concern. I have so many. Second is my sister works for the VA in White River Junction, and she has described the workplace the past couple months as being like psychological warfare every day. Right before midnight, another email comes saying, you know, you can't come work from home, where you have people who are working with young families, and they're working on the Canadian border, and my sister works in Greenfield, Mass. Lives in Greenfield, Mass. You know, they're from all over, and then, it changes every single day, and so much confusion. And many of those workers in the VA are veterans themselves with PTSD. So this kind of workplace stress is huge. And then my third concern, I run a nonprofit in Guilford, Neighborhood Roots Food Collective, and so food security. Right now we're hearing that the local program that was for all the schools getting this funding for local food, which is going to support the farmers, going to help the economy, is now frozen. So, and we were, as a nonprofit, we were really excited about connecting local farmers to feed our Guilford students.
Great points, thank you. Over there.
Hi, I'm Susan Healy, and I have two comments. First is really an announcement. Last night we had an event, the Brattleboro Literary Festival hosted a cocktail hour that was interviewing the authors of a book, The Invisible Doctrine, The Secret History of Neoliberalism, and the conversation was amazing. The content is dark, but the conversation is uplifting and a call to action with a lot of good ideas. There is a companion documentary that is going to be shown. There's a community screening tomorrow at the Latches at 5 p.m. and it's highly recommend. My second comment is really asking the panel to speak on what I read about in the Vermont Digger this morning. Every day you see more institutions obeying in advance and the universities that are willing to do what they need to do in order to not lose their funding. And then this morning there was an article on the Vermont legislation minimizing the ethics legislative monitoring. You'll be able to speak on that, but I hope somebody will. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vicki. Who else is seeing challenges?
Hi, I'm CJ King, live in Jamaica, and I'm concerned about healthcare, both Medicare and Medicaid, both from the person, individual of sort of that age, and also because I work as a grant writer for Grace Cottage, and have some federal funding that we hope doesn't get clawed back, and that's grants. And then what's going to happen to Medicare and Medicaid if we decide that we're going to take care of the whole community equitably?
Yes, very good point.
Oh, you're gonna hold it. Okay. Who are you? I'm Laura Chapin. I'm from Putney, and my friend Ian could probably speak to this more eloquently than I can, but I'm very concerned about the organization ECDC that supports our local refugees. They have had to go through 50% layoff because of government funding being cut to them. And these are folks that many of them came to us because we went into their nation and messed everything up. And now they have to come to us because they were supporting the US. They're in a new place without supports. They don't speak the language. They don't have the resources that we do. And now we're cutting off the only real resources that we're helping them.
Thanks, Laura. Over here.
Thank you. Janice Baldwin, Putney. I share almost all of these same feelings that people are expressing, but I'd like to talk about another emotion that some of my peers are experiencing, and that's frustration. That's frustration with our elected representatives in Washington. Bernie's out there running around the country, having town halls, listening to people, energizing people. That's all we're hearing. You know, there was just this whole furor about signing the stopgap measure. We're not feeling any leadership at all from our Democratic leaders in Congress, and that is really scary for us, that they are just laying themselves down. If you read On Tyranny by Richard Snyder or listen to any of these other people, this is one of the first steps. It's just not doing anything. And that is really not just frustrating, but scary.
On that point, if I can just, I was in Washington, D.C. this past week, and I had a lot of meetings, and there were a lot of different reasons to be there, and there were a lot of high points, but the most important moment to me was getting a meeting with Senator Bernie Sanders, and at the beginning of the meeting saying thank you for what you're doing in terms of going around the country, because it does give me hope in this moment of dark that he is such a bright light.
So my big worry is the thing that encompasses all of this, which is the theft of money by Trump and Musk and the rest of them. They're stealing everything in front of our eyes, and it's amazingly frustrating to see them stealing, like no-bid contracts from all Musk's endeavors, getting rid of every other company that doesn't belong to Elon Musk, and a lot of other amazingly corrupt stuff right now. I mean, the money is just all flowing to the billionaires right now. And that's why we can't do anything in Vermont that requires money. That's why every state is going to be deprived. So one of the things I've been wondering, and I don't know if it's even possible, how can states direct the money that goes to the federal government from our citizens to our states? That's the thing.
Hi, my name is Tara Sullivan. I work at the high school and I work with students with disabilities. And there's a state program named Higher Ability that we have a school liaison who connects our students with that state agency that supports them in training and employment and support after high school until I think the rest of their lives, if I'm not correct. And we just got an email this week from our school liaison saying their funding has been cut so severely, they've had to cut their summer camp program. And that's only their first thing that they've cut, their first decision, but there are more decisions coming about what else they're gonna cut. And it's tragic.
Wow. That's a big concern.
Huge concern.
So I'm David Eastman from Guilford. One of my concerns, and I share every concern that's been spoken, but one of my concerns that hasn't been spoken is the fear, I'll put it this way, the fear of Elon Musk's social media wedding with AI, wedding with tax records, wedding with the Justice Department, and if that, doesn't put a threat or a fear. I just read a novel about the Allende situation years ago in El Salvador, or Chile. And link that with what happened in Nazi Germany of neighbors turning in neighbors. And now Elon Musk can do that at, AI speed to identify everybody in this room and link it to our tax records or the Justice Department or, the patriot groups. And that puts a huge fear in my mind. And I look to the state government and state representatives to help protect me and the privacy of my data and my private information from Elon Musk.
Yeah, thank you.
Very concerning.
Oh, yeah, John, Emily wanted to.
I
Here,
just
Emily.
wanted to say that I am on the Economic Development and Commerce Committee, and we are actively working on protecting you and your data.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Bridgewater. I work for the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust, so I'm very concerned about the state of housing and its connection to federal dollars. On our operating side, 38% of our budget is tied to either directly to federal money or indirectly through projects that we fund that are funded through federal dollars. So what that means is a senior who needs a new roof that gets that funded through the CDBG program, if that's cut, that program doesn't exist in Vermont anymore. And a lot of folks with deferred maintenance that have assets but not income that really benefit from that program are not going to see those benefits anymore. I'm concerned about the Section 8 program getting gutted and what that means for lower income Vermonters being able to pay their rent. I'm concerned about our ability to build more housing. We've got a pipeline that's in motion with funding that's already committed, and we're ready to break ground, and I'm worried about that getting clawed back. So there's just a lot of concern. I know this administration has said they care about housing, so the proof will be in the pudding whether they come through with that, but collectively we provide housing to almost 1,000 households in southeastern Vermont, and we provide a lot of funding for home repair and then direct support through services like Sash for All and our shared equity program. All of those things are in jeopardy if those programs get gutted. So that's my primary concern.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Good morning. My name is Liza. I work for the Area Agency on Aging and the Nutrition for Elder Space, and our concern
of course, is that a lot of the funding that supports home-delivered meals in this community is potentially at risk. And it's causing us to, we've spent the last several years working very hard to expand services to the most vulnerable elders. And now we're worried about what the contingency plan is. And even that is a tremendous loss for this community, which is among the oldest in the country, this county.
Hi, I'm Julie Cunningham. I'm the director of Families First. We serve youth and adults with disabilities. And so like everybody else, I'm extremely concerned about potential catastrophic cuts to Medicaid. Medicaid is the lifeline for people with disabilities in this state and in the country. Vermont does not have a state-run institution. It does not have state-run group homes. All of our programs for people are in the community, funded through Medicaid. And on top of the extreme anxiety the people that I serve and their families are facing, since Elon Musk tweeted the R word, the use of that word has gone up 70% on the platform. And alongside that, I'm just extremely concerned about the rise of white supremacy, anti-Semitic speech that is becoming normative instead of something that we, I feel like societally, we'd come to a place where we were condemning that and that there was some policing of that. Now it feels like a free fall. So I'm extremely concerned for all vulnerable people with the rise of an acceptance of hate.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tammy McNamara. I live in East Somerston. And for the context of my concern, I'm a mom of 2 public school children right now. And I feel very fortunate in that our very local schools have reiterated a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as supporting those in the LGBTQ plus community in our schools. But I am deeply concerned about the threats to cuts in funding for our public schools that's coming from the federal government. I would love to trust Vermont not to comply in advance, but I would like to know what our backup plan is.
Great. A couple more challenges, and then I think we'll move on. I go down over here. Something that we haven't heard yet.
Thank you. Mulholland from Westminster West. Concern that I have is about the lack of staffing of civil servants, who I tend to believe, since I know a fair number of them are really dedicated to doing the right thing. A couple of real life examples, Mike and others. Since Trump was in office, I started receiving threats from the IRS, and I say this knowing that the sheriff is standing over there, demanding that I pay $33,000. I made inquiries, I got letters back saying, we're working on it, so I figured I'd better lawyer up. They wouldn't tell me what the problem was, but they told the lawyer. So Mike, I think you'll enjoy this. They say that back in 2021, Social Security retirement paid me $578,000, which is absolutely impossible.
Didn't we hear about that in the State of the Union?
But there's nobody available to fix it. So
yeah, right.
They're there to send you the threats. So I don't know whether to start packing for Gitmo or what. But I'm also a representative payee for an adult who's autistic here. And here's another real life problem started receiving in the last couple of months thanks to what's going on in DC. I just received another letter demanding that I pay within 30 days the value of all the services that this person has received.
What? That was from whom?
That was from Social Security.
Wow.
Despite my having verification of benefits. But again, the folks in Rutland are nice to talk to, but they apparently don't even know who to talk to fix this. So I don't know who's going to come after me first, the IRS or Social Security, but I hear Cuba's nice this time of year.
On both of those points, I would suggest reaching out to congressional delegation, their constituents, yeah.
I have, but that's evidence of what the lack
Yeah,
of staffing is doing.
100%.
To real people.
100%.
Really sorry to hear that.
Hi, my name's Kim Nace, and a couple things that haven't been mentioned yet. One is that I'm just very devastated by our change in our international relationships and NATO, and especially Ukraine. I feel locally it would, I want to be involved in any ways that we can support those relationships, because it's pretty devastating. Another thing that hasn't been really mentioned yet is about violence. And, we talked about, like Julie was saying, all this new hate, but I have to be really honest, there's a part of me that just feels like we're going through something. If there's going to be a civil war, let's just get it started so we can get through it. And I know other people might think that, but not want to say it out loud. When I voice it, people say, don't go there. But I feel like we're in a really radical place, and so I just wanted to mention that I think we should be considering what that would look like in terms of when we do all this planning. And my big question, and I asked it to Becca and Bernie when they had their town hall, but it didn't get out online, was, do we believe that our federal military is going to protect us? Are they going to protect us, or are they going to comply? And so are we at danger of that kind of violence?
I'm going to take one more about thought.
Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission. We had a gathering of select boards in Newfane on Wednesday, and of course the topics came up, but I think one of the challenges is for the towns to even understand how to start talking about what this means for them, because right now you don't really know, right? It's still, we're less than 100 days into this, but really starting to think about greater self-reliance, just especially when it comes to disaster response, recovery, mitigation, other things, needing to set aside money, thinking about public finance, lines of credit, just all the stuff they need to be more resilient. And then I guess this is more of a personal level concern. Canadians are pissed, and they are viewing an existential threat. And I know how in this country we would respond. Now, how are they feeling? And I think it's going to be critical for Vermont to maintain, double down on like personal, cultural, social, economic relations, because the strategy here is to crush their economy and force them into a position of desperation. And how will Canadians react? The border's pretty open, and it should be. But it's just something in the back of my mind. I listened a couple of weeks ago to there's a joint CBC and NPR call-in show, and to hear Canadians talk about, will the Commonwealth come to our rescue?
Right.
Will NATO come to our rescue?
Right.
Because of us.
Wow.
And they're viewing this, their leadership is recognizing it as the existential threat that it is. We've never lived through this before. So what does that look like as a border state?
Thanks, Chris.
So, who is seeing any opportunities in this current?
My name is Courtney. I came down from Hartford this morning, and so I see two for sure. One is us being here at the Burlington meeting. When I got that email, I just thought, oh my gosh, my state is going to do something. This is positive. It's, as you said, coordinated, proactive. We're barely started. We're here. I think that's huge for us, and I also think we could be leaders. We could show bigger, more complicated states how it's done. We're a small state. We can do it. Second opportunity that and this, I haven't had time to think. I was in fundraising and development, grants, foundations, universities for a long time, and I haven't researched it, but I'm guessing there are opportunities to replace federal funds with private foundations and endowments and that. And so I think maybe there's a committee or task force that can start looking into that.
Okay, that's a great suggestion.
appreciate what Treasurer Pieciak was mentioning about the need to build reserve funds for disasters. But Vermont is a tiny little state with a tiny little economy, and I think what we should be strongly looking at is getting every state from Delaware to Maine to engage in interstate compacts to replace the ways in which somebody like FEMA or other organizations within the federal government and other funding sources within the federal government have in the past been able to be relied on to protect us, that we need to join together with other states to do that, especially in light of the transformation of the federal government into a personalist regime where you go to Elon Musk or you go to the president, and if they say you're good, they'll protect you, and if they don't like you, they won't protect you.
Yes, very good point. Other opportunities or ideas for action that we could be taking? A few here.
Nancy Browse, I live in Guilford. I would say this is the time we need to tax the rich. I'm sorry. We need to tax the wealthiest residents of the state. We are going to be losing all our money, and that's what has to happen. They're going to get huge tax breaks from the federal government. It's really time for Vermont to say, I mean, the reality of whenever they say, oh, they're all going to leave the state if we impose like a 3% tax on their wealth. That's bullshit. They don't even notice a 3% tax on their wealth. So I think it's really past time, but we need to do it now to tax the wealthiest residents. And second homeowners need to be moved up right now.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think that, George Carver, West Brattleboro. There's a lot of things we can do, but what I think this provides us is an opportunity. The Trump folks, people that supported him, got together, got him elected, but they're a small number overall. We have the opportunity to come together as a much larger group, to talk about and formulate the things that we really believe this country should stand for, does stand for. And it's a time that we can really reshape things if we can come together as a unit and do it right. Thank you.
George. Other ideas for action?
I'm going to put it a little bit different than Diane, but we need to start taxing the people who have the money, and not the people who don't have the money. If you look at, the school funding, for instance, who's a big discussion point about how to, taxes and school funding, it's all on property taxes. Property taxes don't depend on whether you have the money to pay them or not. It's income, and it's wealth income, and it's money made from money. And it's not just, if that ends up on the wealthy, well, that's because they're the ones that have them, have the money and have not been paying their fair share. And it's not about penalizing them, it's about making them pay their own share.
Okay, thank you.
Charlotte Gifford of Westminster. My overarching concern that I'd like to see us prepare ourselves to address is the breakdown in the rule of law, because that's what overarches everything here. I appreciate the concerns about possible violence, and I think that we have to realize that this is what I struggle with. We have to be ready to stop our lives and all get out. And I think the first examples, we're getting hints. I'm very grateful for some of the many court decisions that have initially gone in the favor of sanity and our proud traditions, but already you see pushback in the administration of saying, oh, but we didn't understand this piece, or we don't think that piece applies. So that with that incremental approach to ignoring the rule of law, I think we really have to be ready to all just slam the brakes on all our lives, stop and get out, and put our bodies on the line to say, we demand the rule of law. We demand that justice be implemented. Because if we can't have that, then we can't roll back any of the distressing testimonies that we've heard today, right? And I do realize I'm not that naive. It all depends on the Supreme Court ultimately. But I believe they are being influenced currently by the beginnings of the voicing of indignation on the breakdown of the rule of law.
Other ideas for action? Oh, I know.
Thank you, John. Betty Fry from Guilford, Vermont. As a lifetime activist, my blood is boiling, and I just don't know what to do with my emotions, whether I want to go full-blown activist or just be patient and see what's going on. But what I am really disturbed about in our own state is our own governor, Phil Scott. That was, and so I'm hoping he's going to watch this as an activist. I hope he's going to be hearing this, that I hope he's not going to run again, and that Democrats and independents and progressives don't vote for this person, because what is he doing for us? Look at our delegation. We're all swinging together. Everybody is showing up. What have we heard from Phil Scott in helping us? We are so fragile right now. We need true leadership. 2 years from now, we need true leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Betty. Okay. A couple more ideas for action, and then we'll have to wrap up. So I want to try to find somebody who hasn't spoken yet.
Hi, Bill Conley from Dummerston. I think many of us who have come to this room today have probably started examining our economic power, our purchases, and it's a tough one because we're so embedded in this economy that has been created over the last 50 years, especially with the advent of social media and the internet, and how, you know, I'll put myself in that same category. I buy from places like Amazon, but we really need to re-examine our purchases, who we buy from, how they're supporting this insanity everywhere, and to turn our economic buying power to Vermont local businesses as much as we can. So I know people already do that. I'm advocating for, you know, some increment of more of that. So
Full local.
Hi, I'm Molly Stoner from Dummerston. I think that a lot of what we've talked about is inside the system thinking, and that's wonderful, and all of it are things we should do. And I also think that I'm not surprised to think, like Kim Nace, we're at a point where we also need to bust the system and be outside of it. So I've started to think in my head of what can I do inside the system, what can I do outside the system? And one of the things that comes to mind for me is that we're not at all dealing with people with whom reason is going to work. And so what are the strategies we use elsewhere in our lives when reason doesn't work? And I'm thinking about you know, the mental health professionals who work with malignant narcissists, and what can they help us learn about how you approach people who approach the world in that way. And so I'm wondering about what I believe still, as an optimist, are many, many Republicans who feel trapped within fear and within grade school dynamics or high school dynamics. They feel fearful about speaking their opposition to this massive bully situation we have going on. And I want to find the professionals who can help us help them learn the strategies to stand up and speak up, because we need them really badly.
Wow. I'm going to look to the treasurer, and there are still some more ideas here, but I know we want to move along to other parts of.
I think we can keep hearing from folks.
Keep hearing from
Yeah,
folks?
I'll cut my time down at the end.
Excellent, great. So who have we not heard from that has an idea for action?
Hi, I'm Karen Hoover from West Brattleboro, and I am probably saying something that others have intimated, but I think it's important that we get out and rally, particularly for our postal workers. This administration wants to privatize all of government, and we need to be aware of this, and that is a huge redirection of money to Wall Street. So I really hope that people pay attention to when these rallies are. There's one at 3 o'clock tomorrow in front of, I think, the Congregational Church for the postal workers. And I hope a lot of you will make it there.
Okay, thank you for that.
I'm Bronna Zlockover from Vernon, and we are the people who have to do the changes. We can't say, Governor Scott, you do it. We can't say it's the Republicans. It is us. It is me. It is I, not them. So let's stop polarizing. Let's stop polarizing. Let's stop them and using. And let's stand and do something ourselves. I don't know what to do. And I ask myself, well, I'm doing a couple of things, but I think we have to do more. And I don't know what it is, but we are here today. Maybe, you know, this is our community, and there are people who are not here or our community also.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm Craig Hammond. I live in Brattleboro. Isolation conquers fear, I'm afraid. And I think just to be here today is an action. I've been thinking a lot about what is action in this time, in these times. Just to meet with other people and talk about this is an action. Our group, I used to live in Marlboro. I'm part of a group there called Resist Tyranny, 05344, and we now have a website, and we list all the opportunities daily that people can take advantage of for action, with our feet, with our mouths, with our hands, so on. We look at that every day, and we add articles, and we read on tyranny, and we read one lesson every week, and we talk about it. And many of those lessons are implicit in what we're talking about today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Great, thank you.
I'm Jane Winterling from Brattleboro, and I can't believe I'm saying this because it's so revolutionary. And it scares the bejesus out of me. But you know, if we come together as a collective and stop paying our federal taxes, if we say, we don't like what you're doing with our money, and granted, one or two of us can't do this, it's gonna have to be a really concerted effort of people from all over the country just saying, I'm not paying my federal taxes, you know, because I don't trust you to do this. And I haven't paid my taxes yet. For this year, and I am so upset. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you any more of my money until things come around. But that's my solution. We'll see what happens.
It's a tea party.
A tea party.
Yep.
That's
Yes,
not
okay.
to say I don't want to pay my Vermont taxes.
How do we get our federal taxes to go to Vermont? We all want that.
Yeah,
I mean, can you make it happen? I mean it. Can you make it?
well, thank you, Michael, for having this gathering today. Bob Tortolani from Brattleboro. I'm happy to say I'm a Brattleboro resident. Basically, my sense of an opportunity is to continue to meet like this. Isolation is not good for our health. We've talked about how much anxiety and anger people have. I'm going to suggest that we really think about our families, appreciate our families, and try to do whatever you can for your own health right now, because everyone's health is somewhat in more jeopardy as a result of what we're feeling emotionally. So think about sleep, think about eating well, think about exercise, think about being with friends, And think about your neighbors. I think it's very important to look at your less, people who are disadvantaged. And finally, be kind to each other right now, because this is a time when everybody is feeling stressed, and you don't know what everyone's going through. So as you interact with your colleagues, your friends, your neighbors, and people you don't know, just be kind. I think it's very, very important at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Great, Bob, thanks.
Well, we do want to hear from our legislators. I just want to check we probably should transition to checking in with our legislators. I want to thank everybody for your comments. Bob, I mean, last week we had a rally in Montpelier. Over 1,000 people showed up, and my whole message was that kindness itself can be an act of resistance. And I think you hit it right on the head. You want one?
Can I just add on to that?
Yes.
Because, and I'm sorry I don't have the mic, and I'm sorry to do this to the group, but what I'm feeling is that it's already being touched on here. Thank you. Melissa Johnson, Brattleboro. It's been touched on, starting with Molly, but this fear is being held by everybody, both sides. So when we're talking about not polarizing, and we're talking about trying to get outside the box, I feel profound compassion when I see people like Marco Rubio looking very uncomfortable. These people, and I'm sorry some people aren't, but I'm feeling compassion because they are also so terrified and so afraid, and their families are being threatened, and their welfare is being threatened. And if people here are getting, so there's terror on both sides, this fear. And unless we can find a way for us to sit down and have conversations about that commonality, that we have so much more in common, and that we have to stop polarizing. And in my opinion, that's the only way that's gonna help people. How can we support the people who are so afraid of standing up to the bully? That's what we have to do. And I was a school counselor, and I did a lot of work with the bullying. And it's difficult, but that's really what this is about, in my opinion. And thank you for your time.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank everybody for speaking today. I mean, that really was powerful. I know that legislators want to provide their reflections, and I'll provide mine at the end, and I want to give them an opportunity to speak, so I'll hold more comment till then. So I want to really appreciate that we have, in the Windham County delegation, great leadership in Montpelier, and we're really fortunate to be joined here. And we have our full delegation, but really appreciate the 4 legislators that are willing to speak, including our 2 senators. So with that.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Nader Hashim. I am one of the 2 senators for Windham County. I'm also serving as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm also a member of the Education Committee. And I just want to start by addressing something that was brought up a couple of times, and that was a fear about the lack of the rule of law. And that is something that has kept me up at night as well. I remember in the fall when I had a suspicion that I was going to be the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I started speaking more frequently with folks in the Attorney General's office, the Department of Public Safety, and one of the common concerns is that our courtrooms, lawsuits, those are how we resolve conflict. And in order to resolve conflict, the plaintiff, the defendant, and the judge, and the court entirely, it has to follow a set of rules. But when those rules start being disregarded by one side or the other, then the question becomes why do we have courtrooms? Why do we have lawsuits if it's not going to matter? That's the thing that concerns me the most. And I mean, I also appreciate some of the points about greater self-reliance, and I also want to emphasize we should be looking at that in terms of our local food systems as well. And a little while ago, I was reading something about this concept called hypernormalization. It was, I can't remember the professor's name, but it was this concept that came up when the Soviet Union was collapsing. And in the months and the years preceding that, a lot of people were just in a place where they didn't know what was coming next, and things just went, the status quo kept on moving forward, but people had a feeling that something was off, but they just couldn't quite put their finger on it, and so they were kind of paralyzed in terms of what decisions they were making. So it was just an interesting concept I read about and something I keep in the back of my mind when I think about the utter chaos that is coming from the federal government. And I appreciate that we spent a lot of time hearing from folks, and I'll keep this very brief. We did just on Wednesday actually pass out a bill that does increase protections for migrant folks in our communities and creates a stronger system in terms of prohibiting different entities from entering into agreements with the federal government. So right now, without this law, right now, if the federal government issued a state of emergency, a local police department could circumvent the executive branch and the attorney general and enter into an agreement with ICE or CBP. And so this bill closes that loophole and requires that if a state of emergency is issued, they will still have to go through the process of getting any agreements authorized by the executive branch. So, and regarding information sharing, thankfully our state has taken a lot of steps preemptively to protect folks. We did pass our SHIELD laws last session, and that involves protecting information related to reproductive health care and gender affirming care for folks who may come from another state to Vermont to access that type of health care. So it protects their information, their data. It also protects the provider's data. And that's something that we have on the books right now. So, well, I said I didn't want to take too much time, so I'm just going to stop there and pass it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Kornheiser. I'm one of the 3 representatives from Brattleboro, and I'm the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. I want to appreciate what my colleague Nader said about, I think, some of what resistance and protection looks like regarding the rule of law, regarding privacy protections, regarding access to reproductive care. You're not going to see headlines about, because we did do that work over the last 6 years here in Vermont. And so we do have a lot of protections in place. And it was very moving to hear from all of you and to hear my fears from 2 o'clock in the morning, from 6 o'clock in the morning, from 5 o'clock p.m. echoed by all of you. And I'm glad to be in community with all of you today. Because that's what's going to get us through. Most of what I want to share with you today is, as chair of the Joint Fiscal Committee, I'm chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. We raise revenue for the state. And we have an overarching committee called the Joint Fiscal Committee that makes fiscal decisions on behalf of the legislature when we're not in session. And this year, this biennium, I'm chair of that committee, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in that context. Because, and I'm actually going to warn you, I want to be here and say that we're going to save us all and that we can fix all the problems, and we can't. And so I want to talk to you a little bit realistically, following up on some of the numbers that Mike shared with you at the beginning, because they're real, and it's gonna hurt, and we're gonna have to figure out what to do with that pain together. So we have a Republican governor that was mentioned. That's real. That affects everything we do, right? That's the person in charge of the administration. And I think in some ways in this context that might be helpful, that might make us less of a target, but it makes it much harder for us to behave in a coordinated way as a state on some of these issues. And so a lot of what we are doing with the Joint Fiscal Committee is ensuring that the legislature is able to act proactively and reactively as federal changes come down the line. So Vermont has a long history of resistance. We have a long history of secession and loving the idea of secession, and I definitely feels very romantic in my body. And it's a terrible fiscal decision. And so if folks want, as Mike said, so folks, Brattleboro actually has a very active tax resistors league related to the Quaker community, and if folks want to engage with that, there's a lot of people who know a lot about that. I'm not that person, but please be in touch with them. So as we lose federal funds, already, we've heard from you all today, it's coming in dribs and drabs, right? It's hard to even map it all out right now. And so what we're doing is we're making sure that when that happens, we're hearing about it at the legislative level so that we can make strategic decisions about whether or not we might be able to backfill those funds from state dollars. I want to tell you that we're not going to be able to backfill all of those funds with state dollars, right? If we lose all of the money that comes in through Medicaid, we're going to need to really rewrite the entire state budget to make sure that we are keeping people alive, we are keeping people fed, right? We are keeping the basic bones of government going. And so those are the kinds of decisions that we're preparing to be able to make strategically over the next year or two in partnership with the Treasurer's office. And we want to be aware of all of those changes that are happening as we're making those decisions, because some of them might be very big, they might make very big headlines, like the defunding of an entire department, and some of them might be on the smaller side, like the defunding of the local purchasing of food for schools, right? And so we're working on that. And you'll know more as that happens, but it's probably not gonna make headlines, and some of it's not gonna be sexy, and some of it's gonna be really, really scary. And it's gonna be scary for the people making those decisions, because they're gonna be hard decisions. Vermont was the last state to change our drinking age to 21. It was 18, right? Most places, I'm sure actually most of you remember that. I don't. We eventually changed our drinking age to 21 because we were threatened with a loss of federal highway funds. And so I don't want us to comply in advance, but I want us, everyone, and not just those in decision-making capacities, to think about what the edges of compliance look like. And it hurts me all over to say that to you, right? But I think we have to be clear, right, about what's ahead of us. And all federal money has always been connected to strings, always. And every single new administration has new strings that we work with. And we've gotten through that before. We got through that with the last Trump administration. But I think it's very possible that sometimes we are going to make a strategic decision to comply in order to make sure that people still have housing in this state. And so I want to be real about that. I want to be real that the proposal that the House moved forward last year to tax the rich only raised $70 million. And that is not going to make even a drop in an ocean of the scale of federal money that we would be losing if we lost all federal money in the state. So I don't want to breathe all of my fear into a room full of fear. I want to tell you that we are going to need to come together as a community to take care of each other. And that we cannot just look to our elected leaders to fix these problems. Because what we're going to need to be doing, we're going to need to focus on those hard decisions, on governing, on legislating, on spreadsheets to some degree. And I hope that from within all of you, there can be the leadership to make sure that your neighbors are still being fed and that you are leading the resistance. Because I can't be the person that takes us to the streets, because I need to be looking at a spreadsheet to make sure that we still have housing. I think right now we are so in the habit of looking to the person with the largest social media presence or the loudest voice or the clearest voice and say, you are going to lead the resistance. We elected you to lead us. But the resistance comes from within all of you. There are new leaders that are going to emerge in this time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for your work. I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm one of the two state senators. I live in Brattleboro. I really appreciate how the treasurer started us with a conversation about emotions. I think that's really important that we keep that in focus. I think we need to stay calm, stay engaged, be alert, be creative. Definitely don't buy online. It's not that hard. It really isn't. Brattleboro has almost everything. The only thing I can't buy here is sheets, actually.
They have them experience goods.
Okay, experience goods, and you can go to Keene. Keene still counts, I think. But especially what Dr. Torlani said about talking to each other, getting outside, We need all of our faculties at this point, and we can't rely on other folks. And Vermont has a long, long tradition of being self-sufficient, and I think we can obviously use that right now. I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing, what I've been doing in the state Senate. I'm chair of the Institutions Committee, and now it's the IT and Institutions Committee. And we just passed out a bill for kids code, so it's to protect our children from all the harms that are happening to them from social media. So it will be a very effective bill once it goes through the House, but I'm proud of that. We're also doing data privacy for everyone, and that's so, so essential now. And one way to protect yourself is just leave this at home, because this is how they track you, and it's true. We've been tracked for years. That data is easily available for sale on the internet. That's how predators find their former spouses. They find children that way. So be really alert about how you use your phone, but just understand that it takes legislation. This isn't something that individuals can completely do on their own. That is something we must do collectively, and we are. But there are ways that you can protect yourself. I was at a rally a couple weeks ago, and there was someone who I knew. I didn't recognize her at first because she was all covered up. It was winter, but she was really tense about being recognized and about being photographed. So that fear is real, and that's something I think we need to just overcome. But you overcome it in community. One other thing that we did just this past week was a resolution supporting trans and non-gender Vermonters, because they're getting a lot of the vitriol from the president, and that was unanimous. That was a bipartisan resolution. So going forward, it's been really good to hear all of the comments and suggestions. And I think what we need to do is have some sort of mechanism. I think we ought to use existing entities like Wyndham Regional, the town, BDCC, and just more intentionally get together in person and talk about our fears, but also talk about what we can do, because there are things about the federal government that aren't that helpful. The strings that you talk about. Let's be really intentional about, especially in housing, there's a lot of strings in housing, about how we might be able to find better ways to do things. Obviously, getting the funding is the challenge, but we have a really good treasurer. And I don't mean to minimize that's going to be hard. But let's really examine these systems this is an opportunity to examine the systems, because we could maybe build some of them back better. So let's be alert to that. In housing, a couple of towns around us are actually taking things into their own hands. They've started doing that in Newfane, and another town in our area. They're actually establishing funding to develop housing. Zoning doesn't cost money to change your zoning. Zoning is increasing housing and development. And there are folks with money, and there are institutions with money that now's a good time to step up. Just speaking of money and transportation, I'm on the transportation committee this time in the Senate, and it's obviously very interesting and targeted what kind of transportation funding was stopped, and the transportation funding that was stopped was funding for things that address climate change. So we had a really good program going to put in EV charging stations, kind of the way Teslas are, but not Teslas, public stations, but they would be at different areas in on the interstate, and we had contracts. State had contracts, really good contracts, already in place. That funding was stopped. We were able to put in one station, but as far as we know, all of the funding for the roads, for the bridges, which is a considerable amount, that funding is still expected to be received by the state. So a lot of these things are very strategic, very targeted. So the state might be able to be flexible on the funding that we are going to get. But we need to stay calm. We need to stay in conversation, and we can do this. It's also, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, these first couple of months have been intentionally chaotic. The courts are starting to show leadership and to minimize. But we just need to be ready for change and ready to realize what we can do for each other together. And that's how we're going to get through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. My name's Mike Merwicki, and I'm the state representative for the Wyndham 4 District. That includes the People's Republic of Putney and Dummerston. I appreciate the concerns everyone shared here today. I want to highlight a few positive things, though, to start with. And the first positive thing, I want to highlight that until August, this guy was not married. And then in August, he got married. So congratulations. I'm wearing purple here. This is the school color. And Julie, when did your son start the work to try and change the mascot here? The early 90s. It just happened 2 years ago. Change can happen. So thank you for starting that to happen. And I want to recognize that I mentioned that to somebody who said, well, that's a small thing. And I said, well, the people of color in town don't think it's a small thing. And I hope we can remember that, because this is a predominantly white audience. This is a predominantly white state. And I hope we can keep remembering the communities that have been marginalized depend on us to stand up for them. So let's keep that in mind. And the other positive thing I want to remember is that we're in Vermont. And if there isn't a Vermont appreciation time, this is it. Yeah. And I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're in community. Because I think that is, and I feel that's how we're going to get through all this. We heard a number of things that were shared today, and most of them were about the federal landscape. And I know it's hard not to see that shadow. But we are state legislators, and we have very little we can do in regards to the federal landscape right now. But what we can do is focus on what we're doing in Vermont. And I'm going to echo a little bit of what I think some of my colleagues were saying and share some of the reality we're facing and what we can do to help with that. The first reality is Governor Scott won decisively with 2/3 of the vote. And not only that, he raised a lot of money and he brought a lot more Republicans into the House and Senate, so we no longer can overturn vetoes the way we did. The reality is, when we come to legislation, he gets the last word now. And whether it's the budget, whether it's education reform, he gets the last word. So we're gonna have to try and fight and get the best deal that we can, and we will try and get the best deal that we can. But we're up against a tough reality right now. And that's why I'm gonna ask that when you contact me, and I love it when people contact me, and most of the time, people agree with what I'm doing. And then I say, so did you contact the governor? And they say, oh no, should I do that? Totally. I think he gets away with a lot, because people assume, well, he's a nice guy. But let's face it, he's just put out an education plan that seems like it came from the White House and not the State House. He's put out a climate plan that seems like it came from the White House and not the State House. He wants to stop our actions on climate. And I don't think we should let him get away with it. Vermont can be a leader in this way. Now, the reality nationwide is we're living in a country where the economy can be described as one of have-nots and have-yachts. There's huge disparity. And we try and address that in Vermont. We have one of the most progressive taxation systems in the country. And we will continue to do that and be progressive about what we're doing. The reality is we get a lot more money from Washington than we put back. Our Medicaid system gets 2/3 of its money from the federal government. And that's not just health care. Right here in the schools, there's a lot of programs where there are matches. We put in 10%, the federal government gives 90%. Julie, you know the Medicaid programs that help the clients you work with. Those are things we have to continue. There's not enough money in Vermont to cover the realities of the funds we get from the federal government. So keep in touch with us. Keep in touch with the governor. He's got to know how people are feeling, and keep in touch with, let the White House know. Let the people that represent us in Washington know. They can count. And if they keep hearing from more and more people, I think we can change things. And that's the other hope I have. The last thing I want to leave you with, there's a couple of quotes that have helped me get by. One is from Dr. King. The arc of history is long and slow, but it bends towards justice. I want to remember that. And Greta Thunberg has a quote. She says, hope does not live in words. Hope lives in actions. So I suggest whatever you do, keep moving and keep acting, because that's what's going to get us through that too. So thanks.
Well, again, I want to thank our legislators for being here and providing that feedback. I think it really was valuable for all of us to hear. And again, want to thank everybody here for coming and for speaking out. You know, there are a couple of reflections that I have. I just want to mention two things. One is, you know, I mentioned I grew up here, and I love the Brattleboro community. I love Brattleboro. And I love Brattleboro because of its people. And just everyone that spoke today and talked about what you're working on, where you're coming from, you're serving the community, you're being leaders in our community already. And there are so many people like that in Brattleboro. We come together. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a leader in our community. The last thing I want to leave you with is a call to action, kind of like what we heard from Representative Murwicki. You know, action is going to be critical in this moment. You know, you heard, well, is that action too small? You know, any action is important, and the action and its impact on the individual, if you're providing somebody a meal or giving somebody a ride to an appointment, a doctor's appointment, or spending some time with them when they're lonely, that's not a small act to them. That's a big act to them. And whether you're thinking about volunteering at a community organization or thinking about donating to local organizations now instead of maybe some national organizations, or thinking about buying locally now instead of buying nationally, those are actions that add up. And when all of us take those small actions, they add up to significant, significant progress forward. So please, my appeal to you today is think about how you can take action, whether it's today, whether it's this weekend, whether it's this week. You've already taken the action of showing up here and being with us, and I think that's really, really powerful and significant. But think about how you can now go out into the world and take an action to help improve the situation of your community and your neighbors. So thank you for being here today. Look forward to talking with everybody afterward. Thank you.